My name's Lena Wyatt. I'm 25, and I make coffee for a living. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, I step behind the espresso machine on the ground floor of Arcton Media's headquarters in Manhattan. The glass walls let in too much light. The music's always just a bit too loud, and the line never seems to end. People don't talk to me. Not really. They talk at me shouting latte orders into the air, earbuds still in, faces already lit by email stress. I don't mind. I'm good at what I do. I know who drinks oat milk, who secretly hates cinnamon but won't admit it, who only comes in when they're hungover. They call me barista girl, never Lena, but I know their names. And more than that, I know what they're trying to build upstairs. Arcton isn't just another media company. They're working on something called Echo Logic, an AI-driven acoustic engine meant to shape soundscapes that heal emotional trauma. It sounds like science fiction, but it's real. They're trying to map the way frequencies affect memory, mood, even subconscious tension. I know this because the walls are thin, and I've spent a year wiping down tables while million-dollar secrets floated just inches above my head. What they don't know is that I understand every word of it. Before I ended up behind a coffee counter, I studied audio engineering at Brooklyn Sound Institute. I made it 2.5 years before my dad fell off a scaffolding and never came home. He was a builder, not a safe one. We couldn't afford the funeral, let alone another semester of school. So, I quit. Got the first job I could find. And somehow that led me here, serving espresso shots to people developing AI that can feel sadness. Irony's never lost on me. I never told anyone I used to record rain and isolate reverb patterns just for fun, or that I used to mix tracks until 3 a.m. in a closet studio with foam I glued to the walls myself. Nobody asked. And in places like this, no one imagines the barista might know how to route a signal chain. I figured I'd just be invisible here, safe, hidden in plain sight. But everything changed on a Thursday. It was still early Arfili 7, 00 a.m., and I was wiping down the bar like I always did. Then I heard it. A low-frequency flutter echo from the stage down the hall. Most people wouldn't catch it, but to me, it was like a guitar string snapping in the middle of a quiet room. Something was wrong with their system, something only someone like me would hear, and maybe someone like me could fix it. Most people think I dropped out because I couldn't keep up, or maybe because I changed my mind. No one ever guesses the truth. I left because my mom forgot my name. It started with little things, missing appointments, confusing the stove knob with the volume dial. I thought she was just tired. But one morning, I came home from class and found her standing in the kitchen, crying over a burnt pot of water. She looked up at me like I was a stranger. "Are you the nurse?" she asked. That was the day I stopped being a student and became a caregiver. The diagnosis was quick. Stroke, left side brain damage, early signs of vascular dementia. I remember the doctor's voice like it was wrapped in static, detached, efficient, like he'd said it 100 times that week already. I tried to stay in school at first, worked shifts at night, took care of her during the day, slept in 2-hour scraps. But my grades plummeted, and my scholarship vanished right after. So I walked into a cafe, asked for an apron, and that was that. I thought maybe I'd go back someday, when things stabilized. But when you're drowning slowly, you stop dreaming about boats. One night, after Mom fell asleep, I sat in the corner of our apartment with headphones on. I played back an old mix I'd made, just a simple acoustic layering of rain, train brakes, and my own humming. nothing special. But halfway through, I felt something warm spread through my chest. A kind of steadiness, like the sound itself was holding me together. That's when I knew. I might have left school, but I never left sound. It was still inside me, waiting. Just like it waited that Thursday morning when I heard the flutter echo and my fingers itched to fix it. I didn't know then what would come next. I just knew I couldn't keep quiet anymore. That morning, after hearing the flutter echo, I did something I hadn't done in over 3 years. I followed the sound. Down the hallway, past the elevator banks and glass-walled conference rooms. No one stopped me, they never do. I wore black, moved quiet, held a rag in one hand like a backstage pass. The badge said contractor, but the badge didn't know what I could hear. The main auditorium was empty. The chairs were still warm from the night crew's testing session. Cables snaked across the floor, half covered with hazard tape. A massive touchscreen console sat glowing at the front, and on the wall-sized board behind it, someone had written a long trail of audio processing nodes filters, reverb splits, wave modeling algorithms. Complex, precise, but wrong. Dead center in the signal chain, I saw it. A recursive feedback node chained without a limiter. It looked clean on paper. In theory, it should have worked. But real sound doesn't care about theory. It builds its own rules, especially in untreated acoustic spaces. They were feeding too much gain through an unbuffered delay stack. That's what was causing the flutter. I stood there for a full minute, just staring. My hands twitched. My head filled with simulations. Old training came back like muscle memory I didn't know I still had. I looked around. No one. I pulled the stylus from the console's holster. My heart was pounding. I wasn't supposed to touch any of this. But if I didn't, someone upstairs would present a broken demo to million-dollar clients. All because of one overlooked loop. In the silence, I tapped into the chain and wrote 5 simple words in the notes field. Insert soft limiter at node 8. That's it. No signature, no flare, just the fix. I backed away slowly, wiped a non-existent smudge off the screen like I was still cleaning, and walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't expect anything. But what I didn't know was that someone had been watching. Not through the glass, through the system logs. At exactly 7:08 a.m., my edit registered in the project history. And at 7:11 a.m., a test playback ran with the limiter in place. The flutter was gone. Clean. Balanced. What I also didn't know, that playback was manually triggered. By Jonah Cross. By noon, I could tell something had shifted. There was a buzz in the lobby. Engineers whispered. Someone said, "The loop's fixed." Another said, "Cross called a closed-door review." Then, right as I handed a flat white to the junior PR girl, I heard my name over the lobby intercom. No one ever called for me. Ever. "Lena Wyatt, please report to Level 4 Team Echo Logic." My hands went cold. The girl stared. I forced a smile, wiped my palms on my apron, and walked to the elevator. The last time I'd ridden past Level 2, I was delivering a smoothie. Level 4 was quiet. The floor smelled like new plastic and ozone. Screens everywhere. People in denim blazers and $800 sneakers. At the end of the corridor, one door stood half open. I knocked. "Come in," said a voice I'd only ever heard on investor calls. Jonah Cross, CEO, legend, untouchable. And there he was, leaning over the same console I'd tampered with. Behind him, on the giant board, my 5-word note was still visible. He didn't smile. He didn't even look surprised. He just turned and said, "Do you even know what you just did?" I stood there like a kid in the principal's office, arms crossed, heart trying to hammer its way out of my chest. Jonah Cross didn't offer a seat. He just stared at me, not angry, not amused, just focused, like he was trying to decide whether I was a fluke or a threat. Finally, he gestured toward the screen. "That note you left, was it yours?" I could have lied, said it wasn't me, claimed someone left the console unlocked and I was just cleaning, but I didn't. "Yes," I said quietly. It was feedback from a soft limiter imbalance in the delay stack. I heard it echoing in the south hall. He tilted his head. "You heard that? From the lobby?" I nodded. It wasn't even subtle. He didn't respond right away. He walked to the board and tapped the screen. The waveform played back, now clean, stable, warm. No flutter, no unintended resonance. "I've had 4 PhDs fail to catch that in the last 6 weeks, he said. "And you fixed it in 10 seconds. "I didn't fix it. I just pointed it out," I replied. That made him turn. "That's exactly what a fixer would say." He finally motioned to a chair. I sat down, stiff as stone. He sat across from me now, elbows on the table, eyes sharp. "I don't hire by accident," he said. "And I definitely don't let unauthorized edits slide. But I'm not going to write you up. Not today." I swallowed hard. "So, why am I here?" Jonah looked almost annoyed that he had to explain. "Because I'm running a team that's supposed to be building the most emotionally intelligent sound engine on Earth, and yet the only person who's noticed our biggest error is the one person we're not paying to think." That hit me, harder than I expected. He tapped his knuckles once on the table. "There's a closed technical session tomorrow night. Core team only. I want you in the room." I blinked. "I'm not qualified." He raised an eyebrow. "Clearly." Then, before I could speak again, he added, "You won't be part of the team, not officially. No decisions, no credits. You sit, you listen. That's it. One night. Then we both decide if it makes sense to do anything more." I hesitated. I didn't know what scared me more, saying yes or having this be a one-time thing. But part of me, some old dusty part, sparked awake. I nodded. "Okay, I'll be there." Jonah stood. So did I. That was the signal I was dismissed. But before I left, he said one more thing. "Oh, and Lena?" I turned. "Next time you fix something," he said, "sign your name." The room was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, though the AC was definitely too high, but in tone, in posture, in presence. 6 people sat around a long, matte black conference table. All of them wore lanyards with department access codes I'd never even seen before. Half of them didn't look up when I walked in. The other half did. And then looked away, like I was a glitch in the system that would fix itself if ignored long enough. I didn't blame them. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wore a plain black crew neck and jeans. No badge, no tablet, no prepared documents. Just a cheap notebook I'd stuffed in my tote and a pencil that still smelled like cedar. I sat in the corner, against the wall, where the power strip buzzed under the table. Jonah didn't introduce me. He just nodded at me once, barely noticeable, and started the session. It was a technical review of Echologic's Phase 3 build. Emotional resonance simulation. Fancy term for making the AI respond to sadness without just throwing piano notes at it. They were running into issues with authenticity detection. The AI couldn't tell the difference between a voice that's tired and a voice that's grieving. The team pitched solutions: data layering, external sentiment scraping, predictive voice decay modeling, all brilliant, all clinical. I didn't say a word. That wasn't the deal. But as I sat there, listening, something inside me started humming low and steady. A sense of dissonance. Not with the people, with the approach. They were all trying to measure grief in frequencies and patterns, but none of them had ever heard it in real life. Not the kind that lives in the crack between two words. The kind that shows up not in what's said, but in what isn't. My pencil tapped against the notebook without rhythm. My legs shook, my mind filled with memories I didn't ask for. My mother forgetting who I was, the silence after the doctor left the room, the hum of the fridge as I cried without sound. I looked up, and for just a second, Jonah was looking at me. Not scanning, not evaluating, just looking. And I wondered, maybe, just maybe. He knew what kind of sound I was hearing. I wasn't planning to speak. I told myself that a dozen times before the meeting started. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I wasn't there to fix anything. I was just there to listen. But the further the discussion went, the more tangled it became. Everyone kept circling the same core problem. The AI's emotional mapping was too intellectual. It could categorize pitch shifts, tempo drops, even breathing irregularities, but it couldn't grasp intent. One engineer pulled up a waveform. Here's a sample where the subject says, "I'm fine." The algorithm flagged it as neutral, but the actual emotional state was marked as depressive during post-interview assessment. They went back and forth about training data, context variables, metadata injection. Then, without thinking, without permission, I spoke. What if you're measuring the wrong thing? The sentence just fell out of me. Every head turned, one even tilted like I'd spoken a different language. I felt the blood drain from my face. One of the engineers blinked. "Excuse me?" I hesitated, throat dry, but it was too late to backpedal. I swallowed. "I mean, you're trying to decode meaning from structure, but maybe grief doesn't live in the structure. Maybe it lives in the hesitation before the sentence, the breath people hold when they don't want to say the truth." Silence, the kind that thickens the air. Even Jonah didn't say anything. I shifted in my seat, instantly regretting everything. Sorry, that probably didn't make sense. But someone across the table leaned forward, a woman with a soft Midwestern accent. "No, wait," she said. "She's talking about non-verbal latency, that moment between cognition and speech initiation." A man beside her nodded slowly. "We're not tracking pre-speech waveform tension. That could actually be measurable." Just like that, the room spun on its axis. Someone opened a new model window. Fingers tapped keyboards. Terms were tossed around: pause density, hesitation friction, vocal edge rise. No one was looking at me anymore. They were chasing the question. Not because I gave them an answer, but because I gave them something they hadn't thought to ask. Jonah glanced over his shoulder, just once. He didn't smile, but I caught the edge of something in his eyes. Respect. Maybe curiosity. And that night, when the meeting ended and everyone filed out, Jonah stayed back for a second. As I passed him, he said softly, Good question. That's all. But to me, it was louder than applause. By the following week, they stopped pretending I wasn't in the room. No formal welcome, no title, no official clearance. But someone pulled out a chair for me when I walked in. Someone else asked if I wanted a charger. They didn't know what to call me, so they didn't call me anything. But they started asking, occasionally, "What do you think?" It was never loud, never public, but it was something. They were stuck on a core module. The AI was supposed to respond to vocal samples with dynamically shifting sound beds music that could subtly mirror a person's emotion and help regulate it. But it kept doing weird things. Comforting voices triggered upbeat synths. Distressed speech sometimes led to total silence. It wasn't just a data mismatch. It was dissonance. The kind that didn't show up in error logs. They'd tried everything, retraining the sentiment index, adjusting the spectral curve, even resetting the audio tree from scratch. Nothing worked. On day 3 of Dead Ends, I finally spoke. "Have you checked what's happening between transitions?" The room went quiet. I stepped up to the board and pulled up one of the failed renderings. "Listen here," I said, pointing to a barely visible shift. "From second 14 to 15, the subject's tone dips just slightly, but the engine doesn't shift until 17. That's not responsiveness. That's lag." "But it passed latency benchmarks," one engineer said. I nodded. "I know, that's what's scary." Jonah leaned forward. "You're saying the engine's hearing the emotion, just too late?" I hesitated. "Not exactly. I think it hears it, but doesn't trust it. It's overcompensating for noise. It's too skeptical. It waits for confirmation before acting." Silence. Jonah walked to the console. "If that's true, we're not training an empathetic system. We're training a coward." He didn't say it like an insult. He said it like an epiphany. We rewrote the response protocol that afternoon, built in a confidence buffer that allowed the AI to act on partial signals like humans do when we feel something we can't yet explain. The results weren't perfect, but for the first time, the engine responded with warmth when someone cried. Jonah didn't say much after, just nodded slightly in my direction. But later that night, as everyone was packing up, he lingered near the exit. "You see things most people miss," he said. I shrugged, pretending to play it cool. "I just listen differently." He nodded. "Keep doing that." And then he was gone. No praise, no promotion. But his tone had changed. Not louder, just clearer, like maybe he'd started listening too. The flight to Chicago was uneventful. Jonah barely spoke. I didn't expect him to. I spent most of the time watching the wing slice through clouds and wondering what it must be like to live at this altitude all the time, above everything, yet untouched by any of it. We were there to pitch ecologic to a hospital research board. Jonah would lead the presentation. I was there to support the demo, whatever that meant. No one introduced me. I didn't mind. The meeting went well, better than I expected. There was a moment where the audio engine adjusted mid-sentence to a patient's vocal fatigue, and you could feel the air shift. A woman from the board actually whispered, "Did it just feel that?" Jonah looked at me, then quickly looked away. We didn't talk much afterward. Just went back to the hotel, checked into separate rooms, and met later for a late dinner because everything else was closed. The hotel restaurant was empty. Soft jazz piped in through a speaker that buzzed every time the bass hit. I noticed it immediately. Of course I did. Jonah stirred his drink twice before speaking. "You've never mentioned where you learned all this." I took a sip of water. "I used to study it, a while ago." "Why'd you stop?" I hesitated. He'd never asked a personal question before. I looked down at the table, fingers tracing the rim of the glass. "My mom had a stroke," I said. "The kind that makes people different. I left school to take care of her." Jonah didn't say anything, just listened. "She used to be a sound designer, self-taught, never worked in the industry, but she'd mess with old synths, record crickets, chop up conversations from the news just to study tone. She said everything we hear is someone trying to be understood." Jonah nodded slowly. "Smart woman." "She was," I said. "Even after the stroke, even when she couldn't speak full sentences. She'd hum. She'd tap out patterns on the kitchen counter, like she was still coding in her head while doing laundry." I smiled, almost laughed. One day I caught her listening to the washing machine spin and muttering, "Too fast for vinyl, needs analog slowdown." Jonah chuckled quietly. It startled me. "I like that," he said. "Coding without screens." "Yeah," I nodded. "She called it listening sideways, said when people only listen head on, they miss the emotion living in the echo." There was a pause, not awkward, just full. Jonah leaned back, watching the ceiling for a moment. "You know," he said finally, "you're the first person I've met who talks about sound like it's alive." I looked at him. He didn't blink. "It is," I said, and for the first time, I wasn't just the one listening. It was nearly midnight when we got back to the office. The city was asleep or pretending to be, and Arcton's building stood quiet, its lights humming like distant thoughts. Jonah had a keycard that unlocked every floor. We rode the elevator up without saying a word. He didn't ask why I followed him into the lab. I didn't ask why he didn't stop me. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors left in sleep mode. The prototype rig sat idle, cables coiled like resting snakes. I dropped my bag by the corner desk and sat on the floor, back against the wall. Jonah stayed standing, hands in his pockets, staring at the waveform frozen on the screen. We didn't talk. Not because we had nothing to say, but because, for once, silence didn't feel like a void to be filled. It felt earned. He eventually lowered himself onto the floor beside me, close enough that I could hear the faint shift of fabric when he breathed. "I used to think quiet meant failure," he said after a long while. I looked over. He wasn't looking at me, just at the far wall, like the past was playing on it. "I built this company trying to drown out every silence I ever sat through." I didn't reply, just pulled my knees to my chest and rested my chin there. A beat passed, then he asked, "Do you miss it?" I knew what he meant. Not school, not the job, the sound, the world where I used to belong. I nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes I think, maybe it didn't leave. Maybe it's just waiting for me to stop running." He turned to me then, fully, eyes a little softer than usual. We didn't say anything after that, but we stayed, side by side, no rush, no pressure. Just two people who'd spent a long time hearing everything, finally sitting in a room that didn't ask them to speak. It started with a clip. 23 seconds. Grainy, vertical phone footage, probably recorded through the lab glass during one of our late-night sessions. I wasn't even saying much, just pointing at a screen, suggesting a waveform tweak. Jonah stood beside me, nodding. Harmless, unremarkable, until someone slapped a headline over it and posted it on StreamPulse. Barista builds billion-dollar AI while engineers watch. Arcton in trouble? And just like that, everything exploded. By noon, it had over 200,000 views. By evening, it was trending. The comments were exactly what you'd expect. So we're letting coffee girls do deep neural tuning now? Arcton's new model is so broke they hired interns from Starbucks. Nepotism or fetish, take your pick. People didn't know my name, but they knew my job, or thought they did. Every post, every stitch, every reaction came with the same sneer. What does she know? They didn't care that I'd studied this. Didn't care that I'd helped fix what no one else saw. Didn't even ask. They just saw the apron, the girl without the credentials, the outsider who must have slipped in through some back door. And the worst part? Arcton didn't say a word. No clarification, no press release, no tweet from the official account. Jonah didn't speak up either. He'd always been careful, strategic, calculated. I just didn't realize how much that included staying silent when things got ugly. The next morning, I walked into the lobby and everyone turned. Not dramatically, just that slight shift in posture, the pause mid-sentence, the way laughter dies half a second late. I felt smaller than I ever had before, smaller than the day I first put on that apron. At the cafe window, someone had scribbled in marker, "Echo Logic, powered by House Blend." I wiped it clean, twice. It still felt there. I spent the rest of the day in the back, pretending to organize syrup bottles just so I wouldn't have to meet anyone's eyes. That night, I opened my inbox. There were job offers, podcast invites, even one from a reality TV producer asking if I'd be interested in a limited docuseries about reinvention. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I watched that 23-second clip again. Not out of vanity, out of disbelief, that something so small, so casually recorded could undo so much. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the TV off and my laptop open, brightness turned all the way down. The glow felt like judgment. I told myself not to read the comments. I did it anyway. LOL, she probably thinks EQ is a personality test. Let's be honest, no barista knows compression algorithms. Not like this. CEO's got a new side project. Bet the code isn't the only thing she's been writing. I scrolled and scrolled. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to say what I knew was true. That I wasn't some random girl who wandered in with a latte and a lucky guess. That maybe, just maybe, I had something real to offer. But no one did. They didn't even use my name. Just called me the barista. The girl. That one. I clicked into one of the reaction videos. A tech influencer with a mic twice the size of his head was dissecting the clip. This is what happens when companies get desperate and start mistaking intuition for skill. I mean, even if she was right, which is a stretch, what does that say about Arcton's hiring standards? I slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought I cracked the hinge. The room went silent again. I sat there, hugging a pillow like a shield, and I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself yet. It wasn't the strangers hurting me. It was Jonah's silence. He knew who I was, what I'd done. He'd seen it, heard it, and still, nothing. No message, no call, no quiet knock on the cafe door. Just corporate stillness. I wasn't mad, not yet. I was disappointed. And that's worse, because I hadn't expected the world to understand. But I'd thought he would. The press conference was set for 10 o'clock a.m. Nothing dramatic, just Arcton's quarterly update, streamed from their HQ media room like always. Clean backdrop, branded mugs, carefully rehearsed non-answers. But this time, it was packed. Every eye, every mic, every comment feed wanted to know the same thing. Who was the girl in the clip? And why was she writing code? Jonah walked out exactly on time. Black suit, calm face, voice smooth as ever. He gave the financials, the product roadmap, a teaser about EchoLogic's next testing phase. Then came the inevitable. A journalist leaned forward, mic raised. "Mr. Cross, can you comment on the footage circulating of an uncredentialed staff member making modifications to your flagship AI? Is Arcton prepared to verify her role?" There was a pause. Half a second too long. I knew that pause. It was the kind that carries weight choices roads not taken. Jonah smiled politely. "We value innovation from every corner of our company," he said. "And we're reviewing all internal processes to ensure our development pipeline remains secure, collaborative, and world-class." That was it. No name, no context, no truth. He might as well have read out a weather report. I watched from the back hallway of the cafe, half hidden behind a rack of croissants. The kitchen staff had it on in the background. No one noticed me. Not really. And maybe that was the point. I thought I'd be angry. I wasn't. I was tired. Tired of being a footnote in a story I helped write. Tired of the way people looked past me, through me, until I made noise. And even then, all they wanted was to know how I'd gotten in, not what I'd built. I didn't even wait for the rest of the stream. I walked into the back room, pulled off my apron, and folded it once, neatly. Then I reached into my tote and pulled out a small flash drive, the one I'd been keeping for weeks. It held a private version of EchoLogic's beta patch, with adjustments only I had worked on. I knew it wouldn't crash the system. I also knew it would leave a signature trace. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. I plugged it into the service kiosk, logged in for the last time, and uploaded the file to the shared dev drive. Then I typed one sentence into the commit note. I won't stay where I have to beg to be believed. I signed it for once. LW. Then I logged out, slipped the drive back into my bag, and walked out of Arcton for good. No one stopped me. No one called out. The city outside was still loud, still moving, still indifferent. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I came in before sunrise. No one was there yet. Not in the lobby, not in the elevator, not even at the front desk. Just the hum of the building's heart beating under fluorescent lights. I brought a cardboard box. Small. Only half full. A set of headphones, my notebook, 2 cables I'd brought from home because theirs always frayed too fast. That was all I had to take. Everything else, I never really owned. My badge still worked. One last swipe, 4 green lights, and the elevator sighed open. When I stepped onto the lab floor, the stillness hit me. It wasn't cold this time. Just done. Like walking into a theater after the final curtain. I moved quietly. Desk, box, headphones wound carefully. Charger, notebook. I didn't rush, not because I was dragging it out, just because I didn't want to fumble. There's a dignity to quiet exits, if you do them right. The only thing I left behind was a single post-it, stuck under the desk lamp, just in case someone opened it. Cleaned the EQ presets. Room 4B has a bass leak near the corner vent. No name. they'd know who it was. I took the service stairwell down, couldn't bring myself to take the elevator, not with all those mirrored walls. At the security desk, Mark looked up from his crossword. "Morning, Lena. You're early." I smiled. "Last time." He blinked. "Oh." I held out my badge. "You'll need this back." He hesitated, then took it, gently, like it might shatter in his hand. "Didn't think you were the quitting type," he said. "I'm not," I said. "I just don't want to be the invisible type anymore." He nodded once, said nothing else. That was the part that almost broke me. Not the leaving, the kindness. I walked out through the turnstile, box in my arms, boots clicking against polished concrete. Outside, the sky was shifting gray into pale blue, like the world was thinking about waking up. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. Some chapters don't need a final sentence. They just end when you stop turning the page. I moved back into the old duplex in Ridgewood. The air smelled like old wood, laundry soap, and faint rosemary from the neighbor's window box. Nothing smart here. No touchscreen panels, no security badges, just a stiff door lock and a doorbell that wheezed instead of ringing. I started working part-time at a community center 2 blocks away. Front desk, copy machine, the occasional translation for an old woman who only spoke Polish. Simple things, the kind of things no one tweets about. But I liked it. It was quiet in a different way, less corporate, more human. In the afternoons, I took care of Mom. She couldn't move much without help anymore, but she still hummed. Little half melodies under her breath as I braided her hair or cooked rice. Sometimes she'd tap on the armrest in rhythm to the washing machine, like old times. And every now and then, she'd look at me and say softly, "You still hear the music, don't you?" I always nodded, because I did. Just differently now. No fancy rigs, no algorithms, just ambient sounds wind through the fire escape, subway brakes squealing in the distance, the tick of the stove cooling down after dinner. I started recording again, not for work, not for anyone, just for myself. Layered loops of daily life, the rustle of grocery bags, the kettle's rising whistle, Mom's soft chuckle when I burned the toast again. They weren't tracks. They weren't projects. They were moments, and moments mattered. I also sent in an application to finish my degree. Just a single online course to start, audio ethics and human-centered design. I didn't need the diploma, but I wanted the structure. A reminder that I hadn't stopped learning, just paused. The world still moved fast, still screamed, sold, and spun stories, but I didn't need it to hear me, not anymore. I just needed to remember how to listen, and day by day, I was learning again. I hadn't planned on leaving anything behind. But the night before I walked out, something tugged at me. A half-formed idea that wouldn't settle. The kind that hums in the back of your skull like a song you don't know the lyrics to, but can't stop hearing. So I stayed late. One last hour. Just me, an open console window, and a prototype branch of Echo Logic no one touched anymore. They'd abandoned it weeks ago, said the responsiveness model was too inconsistent. I didn't think so. They were measuring wrong. So I wrote a line. Just one. A soft override, a tiny sequence embedded inside the confidence engine. It wasn't even code in the traditional sense, more like an impulse. I used a low-latency modulation flag to amplify micro-hesitations in real time. The engine wouldn't even notice the shift until it had to respond to silence. Because sometimes, grief doesn't scream. It withdraws, and machines need to know what to do when nothing is said. I ran one internal test. The result? A patient voice clipped 4 seconds of dead air before the words, "I'm fine." In previous tests, the engine played a neutral chord. This time, it generated a deep cello tone, slow and warm, like a quiet hand resting on your shoulder. It worked. Not as a feature, as a feeling. I didn't tell anyone. I just left it there. Buried, labeled under an internal note, LW experimental fallback, inactive by default. Inactive. Unless someone really listened. Then maybe, just maybe it would answer. When I got home, I didn't think about it again. Not for days. Weeks. I lived. I made rice. I edited little soundscapes on my laptop while Mom napped. Until one night, my inbox pinged. No subject line, just an audio file attached. I clicked it open. It was the cello tone. Mine. The exact one. Followed by a single line of text. "This isn't in our model documentation. Is it yours? JC." I stared at the screen for a long time. No anger, no apology, just the most Jonah-like question in the world. I didn't reply right away. I just sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. He'd found it. He'd heard it. That one line of code I left behind, not to prove a point, not to mark territory, just to make sure the system didn't forget how to feel. And now, it was calling back. The report started small. A technician flagged it during a standard stress test. "Echologic is responding too early, or too late, depends who you ask." A few hours later, someone else noted, "Tone alignment feels wrong, like it's forcing empathy when it shouldn't." Then came the real warning. The AI is skipping known safe transitions in response playback. It's choosing something else. Something we didn't teach it. Jonah's team gathered fast. The whiteboards filled again, simulation logs stacked up. They combed through data, cross-checked recent commits, tried to replicate the shift. Nothing showed up as a bug. But something had changed. The AI was reacting to silence more often than speech. Not in random ways. Purposeful. Sometimes, when a subject paused too long, the system would play a low cello swell, or adjust pitch to match breaths, not words. It was subtle, elegant, but untraceable. Jonah stood in the control room late into the night, staring at the playback console. "Who authorized this version?" he asked quietly. The room fell into that kind of silence you only hear in places where people are afraid to answer. "No one touched that branch in weeks," someone mumbled. "We assumed it was deprecated." Jonah leaned forward. There it was. A test instance labeled LW experimental fallback. Inactive by default. But now, active. Manually triggered. Timestamp, 3 days ago. Source, an internal heartbeat monitor script, not written by anyone on the current team. Jonah didn't move for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, not to anyone in particular, "It's reacting better now than it ever has." One engineer raised an eyebrow. "So it's working?" "Yes," Jonah said. Then, "No." "Then what's the problem?" He looked down at the screen. "It's working," he repeated, "but we don't understand why." In tech, that's the worst-case scenario. A system that functions but doesn't explain itself. An intelligence you can't trace. A ghost in the wires. But Jonah didn't look afraid. He looked focused. And under his breath, just loud enough to be caught on the recording mic, he muttered. She left it behind. Of course she did. They had 5 engineers reviewing the fallback branch by then, all senior, all confused. One of them, Nia Torres, lead dev on acoustic mapping, stayed after hours to go line by line through the legacy instance. Not because she was told to, because something about the AI's new behavior felt too intentional. At 1:42 a.m., she found it, buried 7 layers deep in a conditional tree, in a module labeled Empathic Lag Tolerance, a patch no one remembered approving. And there it was, a single line of inline comment. If silence holds more than pain, match tempo. Emma DEXP. Emma DEXP. Not a code name, not a function, a person. Nia leaned back in her chair. She didn't know who Emma DEXP was, not officially. HR had no one listed by that tag. The commit was months old, buried in a quiet test branch, but the engine was reading it now. Not just reading it, obeying it. She checked the logs. That comment had become active 3 days ago. Same day the fallback module self-activated. Same day the cello tone began recurring in otherwise neutral emotional reads. That line of code wasn't noise. It was a rule. One that gave the AI permission to interpret grief not as absence, but as signal. And it was working. Too well. Nia pulled the commit history again. Most entries were anonymous or batch merged through group pushes, but this one was different, manually submitted and signed. Author, Emma Wyatt. Contractor, temp ID inactive. She stared at the screen. The name stirred something, a distant memory. The clip. The scandal, the barista, the one who fixed the feedback loop, the one who disappeared. Nia leaned closer, reread the comment. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even complex. But it changed how the AI felt silence. That's what rattled her most. Not the brilliance of the logic, but the softness of the intent. At 2:03 a.m., she sent a message to Jonah. Subject, we found something. Attachment, screenshot of the comment line. Body, you need to talk to her. She didn't just patch the engine, she taught it to listen. 15 minutes later, Jonah replied with 2 words. I'm on it. Jonah sat alone in the observation bay. No advisors, no board members, just him, the playback monitor, and the slow, rising hum of echologic responding to silence again, exactly as it should. The cello tone played low and warm. Then a soft piano layer crept in beneath a breath sample. It was perfect. And he didn't know how to explain any of it. The core system hadn't been updated in weeks. None of the senior engineers understood why the fallback behavior suddenly felt more human than anything in the official model. Jonah did. He just hadn't wanted to admit it. He scrolled again to the commit log. Sash, if silence holds more than pain, match tempo, Emma DEXP. The line haunted him. Not because it was brilliant, but because it was true. She'd written it without a diagram, without a meeting, without a peer-reviewed paper. Just her instinct, her ear. The way she'd once said, grief doesn't live in structure. He remembered laughing back then, not mocking, just dismissing, because he didn't understand it, because it didn't come from a whiteboard, because it came from someone who didn't ask to be heard the way he was used to hearing. But now that single line had stopped the engine from spiraling, had stabilized the emotional decay model better than 400 hours of optimization. Not by adding control, by adding permission. Jonah sat back, silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "I built a machine that could hear everything, except the people it wasn't trained to trust." And she trusted it anyway. Before she left, before he said a word, before the world mocked her, she left behind a piece of herself, not for credit, not for applause, just in case the machine ever needed to remember how to listen. And now Jonah finally understood. He hadn't lost control of the project. He'd lost track of its soul. It was a Thursday, late afternoon. Mom was asleep in her chair, a blanket tucked under her chin, the TV murmuring something about rainfall warnings. I was chopping carrots when the knock came. 2 slow taps. Then silence. I wiped my hands and opened the door halfway, expecting maybe a neighbor, or the center's delivery guy who always forgot where the ramp was. But it was Jonah, standing there in a jacket too nice for this street, holding nothing, saying nothing. For a second, I wasn't sure he'd speak at all. Then he did. "Hi, Emma." Not Lena, not Miss Wyatt, just Emma. It landed heavier than I expected. I stepped aside without saying anything. He walked in like someone trying not to take up space. I motioned toward the kitchen table. He sat, looked around, took in the cracked linoleum, the hum of the old fridge, the slight whistle the faucet made when the pipes cooled. I waited. He didn't rush. Finally, he said, "I saw your fallback patch." I stayed quiet and heard what it did. Still quiet. He nodded, slowly. I didn't get it. Back then. Not fully. I thought it was poetic noise, unstable logic, a feeling we couldn't measure. He looked down, thumb brushing against the edge of the table. But it stabilized the engine better than anything we built, and not just technically. The testers, they didn't want to leave the booth. Some of them cried. One woman said it was the first time in a year she felt like a machine waited for her. I blinked hard. He kept going. And the worst part? I almost deleted it. That made me look up. "Why didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. Then, because it listened back. I swallowed. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small player, pressed play, the cello tone, followed by my mother's voice, faint but clear, humming from an old recording I didn't know he had. It layered into the cello like it had always belonged there. When the audio ended, he said, softly, "We're rebuilding the empathy model from scratch, using your approach as the base. But it's not complete. It's unfinished. And the team knows it." I crossed my arms. "So what do you want from me?" He met my eyes finally. Not a comeback, not code. A pause. "I want to know if you'll come teach us how to hear again." That was when I knew. This wasn't about a system anymore. It was about him, and how much of the world he'd missed, chasing sound without ever truly listening. He didn't push, didn't beg. He just waited. And I realized something I hadn't before. He'd changed. Just enough. I didn't say yes right away. I didn't say no either. I just poured us both tea and let the steam fill the space where my confusion lived. Jonah held the mug gently, like it might disappear if he gripped it wrong. He watched me, but not impatiently. He wasn't trying to convince me. He was just there, present, for once. "I don't want to go back to being the ghost in the room," I said finally. "You won't be. I won't be your lucky accident either, or the girl with a good ear." "You're not." He said it so simply, I had to believe him, but I kept pushing. "And if I say yes, what am I walking into?" He looked down at his cup, then back at me. No rehearsed pitch, no company line. "Not a position," he said. "A partnership." I waited. He continued. "We're not building a product anymore, not just. We're building the part of it that makes people want to stay in the room, that makes them feel like silence won't swallow them whole. You knew how to create that, before we had language for it." "And now you do?" He shook his head. "No, but I know I don't. That's the difference." I let out a small laugh, tired, cautious, the kind that comes after months of being dismissed. Then, "Why me?" He didn't blink. "Because you listened before any of us knew what we were missing, and you left something behind that saved what we couldn't fix. That's not luck. That's authorship." The word hit something deep. I'd never been called that before. Not a guest, not a helper, an author. He placed a small envelope on the table. "New contract, new title. Equal decision rights in the empathy core team. No NDA on past contributions, no spin, full credit." I didn't touch it. "I'm not doing this for press," I said. "I know." "Not even for your system." "I know." "Then why now?" He held my gaze. "Because I should have trusted you when no one else did, and I don't want to make that mistake again. Not with you, not with what you hear." Silence. But this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like space had been cleared for something honest. I looked at the envelope, then at him. "I'll come back," I said, "but on one condition." "Name it." "I don't answer to anyone who still calls what I do intuition." His mouth curved, just barely. "Then I hope you're ready to be called co-creator." For the first time in months, I let myself smile. Not wide, just real. The conference hall was full. Not bursting, not chaotic, just full in the way serious rooms get. People with notepads, suits with sharp collars, names I recognized from journals, from patent filings, from comment sections that once laughed at me. Jonah stood beside me backstage. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. Just steady. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "Just this once." He smiled like he'd been holding his breath for days. When they called our names, Jonah walked out first. I followed. No spotlight, no dramatic music, just the hush that falls when someone unexpected walks up to the mic. I didn't start with charts, or graphs, or model benchmarks. I started with a question. "Have you ever said, 'I'm fine,' and hoped someone would hear that you weren't?" Silence. The right kind. Then I played a 4-second clip. A woman breathing, pausing, then softly saying those same 2 words. "I'm fine." And behind it, our system's new response. A low cello tone, followed by the faintest echo of another voice, her child's, layered from ambient memory. You could hear people exhale. And then I spoke again. "We didn't teach the machine this. It learned it because we finally let it." I paused and smiled. Not because I'd won anything, but because I knew finally they were listening. The stage lights weren't blinding, just warm, gentle, even, like they weren't trying to interrogate me, Just make sure I could see clearly. Jonah sat off to the side, not at the podium, not in front. This was my presentation, my words, and he knew better than to frame it as anything else. I looked out into the room: engineers, researchers, therapists, skeptics, founders, investors, a sea of people who'd spent years building things that speak, but rarely things that listen. So that's where I started. Most of what we call intelligence in machines, I said, is actually prediction. Probability stacked on context. Click. Slide 1. A waveform. Emotion. Neutral. Response. Default. But human emotion doesn't always give us context. It gives us contradiction. Slide 2. Same waveform, same words. I'm fine, but a different voice, different breath. Prediction doesn't catch hesitation. Pattern recognition doesn't notice the way silence stretches when someone's holding back tears. Then I played a recording. A man, mid-40s, quiet. Then softly, "Yeah, I guess I'm okay." Pause. No spikes, no vocal tremble. But Echologic played a low ambient chord with a subtle dissonance, just enough for the listener to ask, "Are you really?" I stepped away from the mic, let the moment breathe, then spoke again. We didn't teach the system to spot sadness. We taught it to wait. That caught them. A few leaned forward. A few sat back. So I told them the truth. That kind of nuance didn't come from a data model. It came from my mother. Slide 3. A photo. Just her hands, resting on a keyboard. Headphones next to a tea mug. She used to say silence isn't empty. It's charged. And if you rush to fill it, you miss what's trying to form inside it. I saw a few people nod, a few close their eyes. And I carried that with me when I left school, when I pushed mops through labs at midnight, when I heard engineers argue about latency curves while ignoring what people were actually trying to say. Deep breath. And yes, when I left Arcton, when I felt like I didn't belong in a room full of experts because I didn't sound like one. Now the room was quiet. Still. Not uncomfortable. Just open. I smiled, just slightly. But the truth is, I never wanted to sound like them. Final slide. A live spectrogram of silence, building slowly with micro-resonance. I wanted the machines we build to reflect the parts of us we don't say out loud. Pause. And today, they can. A beat passed. Then applause. Not explosive, not performative. Just steady, grounded. Like everyone finally understood that I hadn't just been fixing broken logic. I'd been giving the system a heart. The morning after the conference, I woke to 3 things: a sore throat from speaking, an inbox full of invitations I didn't want, and an email from MIT. Subject: full tuition reinstatement, human-centered AI. Design body: we'd be honored to welcome you back. Your perspective is exactly what this field needs. I read it 3 times, then just stared at the screen. Not because I doubted it, because I realized I didn't need it to feel whole. But I wanted it. On my terms this time. I closed the laptop and stepped outside. The morning air in Boston was still heavy with conference buzz. I turned the corner and there he was, Jonah leaning against a lamppost like he wasn't waiting on anything at all. We walked. No destination, just the sound of our shoes on wet pavement and the low murmur of a city finally listening. At the bridge, he paused, looked out over the water, then said, You could take the scholarship, go back, lead your own lab. I shrugged. Maybe. And Ecologic would survive without you. Probably. He turned to me. But I wouldn't. That made me laugh. That's dramatic. He smiled. I'm a reformed executive. We only have 2 gears, logic or reckless honesty. I looked at him, not as a former boss, not even as a partner in code, but as the person who, after everything, stood there, quiet, solid, unsure, but willing. And that's when he pulled out the box. Simple, small, no speech, just, I know it's soon, but I don't want to guess anymore. I don't want to optimize. I just want to ask. I didn't open the box. Not yet. I just looked him in the eyes and said, Then ask like you mean it. He knelt, not for drama, just instinct, and said the words like they weren't memorized, but discovered right then. Emma Wyatt, will you let me build something real with you? I said yes. Not because it was perfect, but because for the first time I didn't feel like a part of someone else's story. This one was ours. We didn't want a big wedding, no ballroom, no orchestra, no 100-person guest list, just a space that had heard our story. So we got married in the Arcton Research Center's Acoustic Lab Room 4B, the one with the bass leak I once flagged in a sticky note. The staff strung soft lights across the ceiling. Someone wheeled in a projector. Nia played a custom soundscape recordings from the old prototype mixed with ambient loops I'd made years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Mom sat in the front row, hands folded, humming quietly under her breath like always. Jonah wore a simple gray suit. I wore blue. No vows read from paper. Just a quiet moment, eyes locked, and this, I hear you, and I won't stop. Mark, the security guard, officiated. Turns out he used to be a pastor before tech took over his town. When he pronounced us husband and wife, no one cheered. They exhaled, like the whole room had been holding its breath since the day I picked up that first broken piece of code. Afterward, Jonah and I sat on the floor, just like we did that night in the lab months ago. Side by side, no words needed. I looked up at the ceiling, listened. The room wasn't silent. It was full of memory. And this time, I didn't need to fix anything. Just stay.